bit. Just hanging out here. Come on, no. Yeah, danger zone. Oh, come on. This guy doesn't know what I'm doing, but... Okay. No! Don't you dare. I will literally build my Deathbringer vessel and I will tear you out of the sky. I will commit war crimes so unimaginable. You would wish that you would die, okay? I need some more steering. Whoa. Okay, so we need to... What is he doing? I will say, I feel like my jet is a lot bigger than all the other people's jets. Who is doing those explosives? I'm not complaining. That's just competition to me. Yeah, don't think about it, buddy. I have cruise missiles on my side. Respawn, please. Propeller core. And And so basically, it was supposed to have like these hover propellers. So like, let it hover in place. Oops, wrong button. Oof. It actually has more flight to it. No. guy's like, nope. What? Why? God, your parents suck, brother. You can breathe and they will literally just get on you. Wow, I'm sorry, your parents just... No. Seriously, for breaking your pumpkin? They can suck it. They're manipulating you. They know that you're an independent thinker. Oh, no, you didn't! Nope. No, you just broke. No. Where are you? I'm going. Stupid steroid. You thought I was gonna let you get away with that, huh? Yeah. And if you do it again... Please, build a structure. Please, build a structure. I will destroy it with a cruisy. he's just mad. Come on! Do a plane! Fly a plane, normie! Fly a plane, trank, a tank, a boat, I don't care! Go on, do it! Freaking normie! It's on, you stupid little... I really want him to get a jet so I can... I'm gonna get you, buddy. You're gonna pay for that. Goodness gracious, is this like the bad missile or something? My missiles usually ain't this inaccurate, like right this. I think it might be like the bad missile. Flyby, flyby. I'm going to end your family bloodline. You better be clearing this homie ass field. At me, at me, at me. Come on, at me. Yup. Loop. Loop. One chance, do or die. Yeah, you dumb bitch. That's what you get. Bombed his ass right out the sky. Damn, that was going really fast too. I mean... You wanna go for round two, homie? Goodness gracious, I might have to switch to one of the older models of cruise missile. Okay, I'm gonna check in case this is the actual cruise missile. Maybe. Yeah. I did not just get him twice, did I? I think I did. He's going right from the spawn. This. Seriously? Rockets? Not miniguns? You know the miniguns are better because they help on your target, dummy. Yeah! Look, now you're being smart. Too bad your aim is like your intelligence because there isn't any. Got him again! Got him again! Yeah, respawn your jet, homie! I might be mentally disabled, but it doesn't mean I know there's not a good freaking weapon system. I'll actually take these bad boys off. I think these... Near me? You aren't. He is barely hitting me. Dude. Ready and duped. He's awful at aiming. He's launching rockets at me! Those don't home! At least I don't think they do. I hope he doesn't... I hope he's not as bad at school as he is aiming. They're pretty sure he's got smart guns, like... Okay, ready? We're gonna lure him down here. Don't get close to me. Don't get close to me. And we're gonna lure him down here. And we're basically just gonna shoot him out of the damn sky. He does have missiles, but I said summon. It's not. Wow. Okay. That's not my Predator missile, but why is it doing that? Oh yeah, right. I have to go here and don't do it. Oh my God! What is going on? Boom! Jesus Christ! Oh my God. Meanwhile, let's do it. Shoot it. And he got whooped out of the air. And taken out. And he done. Boom. Just to mess with him even more. That's hilarious. He's probably like pissed right now. Come on. Something terrifying happened to them in the Siberian mountains. I have an idea.
In 1993, 7 hikers set out into a southern Siberian mountain range to hike and explore the beautiful wilderness. Unfortunately, somewhere deep in those mountains, something so horrifying and confusing had happened to them that it's still a mystery to this day. This is their story, and as always, viewer discretion is advised. Lyudmila Korovina was known as a master of survival craft, and at 41 years old, she'd spent decades teaching mountaineering to young students in Kazakhstan. She was known to push people to their limits, and sometimes beyond, to mold them into the best hikers they could be. But despite her reputation for being tough, her past students said she was as good a mentor as you can get, and many of them claimed to owe their lives to the skills she taught them. In 1993, an event known as the Turyada Tourism Festival was taking place, and people representing tourism and mountain sports from all over Russia and the surrounding countries gathered to camp, participate in competitions, and explore the Kamar-Daban Mountains. During this festival, Lyudmila wanted to take a group of her favorite students to do something special and a little more challenging than usual. The Kamar-Daban Mountains are a small chain that form part of Russia's South Siberian Mountains, and they sit near the border with Mongolia near the city of Irkutsk. They stretch 350 kilometers from east to west and are thought to be the oldest mountain range in the world. They are at the highest by any measure, peak at just under 2,400 meters or 8,000 feet, but they're still challenging and beautiful, and with a railroad that provides easy access, they're a popular destination for both tourists and mountaineers. In the summer, they can get quite humid, and temperatures hang around 60 to 65 degrees Fahrenheit or 15 to 18 Celsius. It also often rains heavily as thunderstorms roll from the Mongolian plateau. But again, despite the dampness, they're considered a safe destination to go hiking and an ideal spot for young hikers to explore the wilderness. The route the group had planned, though, wasn't one for the average tourist. Generally, trekking has 3 or 4 levels of difficulty depending on where you are. Russia used a 4-grade system at the time, starting with easy for beginners, moving up to moderate, where you walk up small hills for up to 4 hours or so per day, onto strenuous, where you spend much of the day climbing higher peaks, and then very strenuous or challenging, which sometimes uses no trail at all, and hikers will often travel along high ridges and over mountains from dawn to dusk. And how a route is graded comes down not only to how high you go and how long you'll be walking, but also how many skills you'll need, like knowing how to rock climb or navigate in the wilderness. They're also graded on how physically and mentally fit you have to be to complete the route, and the route Lyudmila and the group had chosen was a grade 4, which is the highest difficulty. Knowing this would be the most difficult trek they'd ever done, they spent months leading up to preparing and training, and over the course of that time, Lyudmila's tough love shaped them into both competent mountaineers and close friends. Finally, on August 2nd, the full group met up to catch the train to Irkutsk. In addition to Lyudmila, there was Valentina, who generally went by the name Valia. Valia was 17 and had been walking the hills all her life. And was known for
17 at that age, and she's
Joining
better than
them was
me.
also
Climbing
20-year-old
mountains.
Sasha. He and Ludmilla were close, and she had known him since he was just a kid and often described him as being like a son to her. Sasha was also exceptionally fit and very experienced at this sort of challenging hike. He would act as almost a second coach next to Ludmilla. There was also 19-year-old Dennis, who was sort of an accidental member of the group. He only got his place on the trip when someone else dropped out because their parents wouldn't let them go. He was so excited to be part of the group that all he left was a short note for his parents that he was going to the mountains and he would be back soon before leaving the house. Then there was also 24-year-old Tatiana, who loved walking the mountains but had never attempted anything beyond a moderate grade 2. This was a chance for her to prove what she was made of, and after all the training they'd done, she felt like she was ready to handle anything. Next was Timur, who was the youngest in the group at just 15. He was essentially born to trek though, and grew up in the mountains and hiking with his parents basically as soon as he was old enough to walk. And then finally, there was 16-year-old Victoria. She wasn't a natural mountaineer, but desperately wanted to be a part of the trip. At first, the others weren't happy about this because she'd had a temper tantrum on a winter hike earlier that year after getting tired. She wouldn't have even been there at all if her mother hadn't called Ludmilla and begged her to take her along. But later, during training, she worked hard and regained the trust and friendship of the rest of the group. After meeting up, they started their journey by train from their home in Kazakhstan to Irkutsk. From there, they went to Marino, which is a town at the foot of the range and the perfect spot to set off from. On the way, they were joined by a couple of guys from Moscow, heading to the area to relax and fish by the Sniezhny River. Then, after arriving in Marino, the plan was to walk until August 5th and eventually meet up with another group led by Ludmilla's daughter, Natalia. Both groups checked the weather forecasts, and things were looking good with above average temperatures and just a little rain forecasted over the next 4 days. The first 2 days went well, and the group took a slightly more unusual route than most, but in doing so, cut off a bunch of time that helped them summit several of the highest peaks ahead of schedule. They walked around 70 kilometers and crossed the Langutai Gorge, then across high plateaus over several rivers, and then up the highest in the Kamar-Daban range, known as Kanulu. Then on the third day, a cyclone coming up from Mongolia took the region by surprise and caused a day of rain that left the center of Irkutsk flooding up to people's knees. That same rain fell hard in the mountains, and at higher elevations, this turned to heavy snow, and the group was walking along a high ridge when the skies opened up and the snow and rain came pouring down. Initially, they decided to press on as far as they could, worried they might miss their rendezvous with the other party. But then as they trudged down the mountain, soaking wet in the pouring rain and wind, they realized it was too exhausted to continue. So at about 4 p.m., they decided that instead of heading through the forest to the planned camping spot, they'd set up camp in the open and get some rest. This really wasn't a great spot to camp because it was an exposed and windy patch between two mountains with just some rocks and grass for shelter. The ideal location under the tree line was another 4 kilometers away, but that was just too far to drag themselves and their drenched bags in the ice-cold rain. They obviously couldn't build a fire either, but that didn't dampen the mood. While the rain continued to come down, they did their best to enjoy the night, huddling in the 2 driest tents while talking about what they'd achieved in hunting so far. For some reason, maybe because they didn't want to get them wet on the inside, they never brought out their sleeping bags. They didn't even take one of the plastic wrap.
Make a
Instead,
bomber,
just fell asleep exhausted on the
super
floor of the
fighter,
tents on plastic ground sheets. Unfortunately, that night wasn't much better, and sleep would be short-lived. At 4 a.m., the ropes to the tent snapped, and they had to go outside to fix them. Not long after they'd done that, the wind tore the stake holding the tents down. Then, finally, after a wet and cold night, they woke up to snow covering most of the area. As they got up and cooked breakfast, they found that the snow had covered basically all the landmarks the day before. After breakfast, at around 11:30, they set off toward the trees, hoping that tree cover would provide some shelter and help them to get their bearings. With any luck, they'd meet the other group ahead of time as they planned the night before. Unfortunately, this is where things took an almost unbelievable turn. According to Valia, just 10 meters into their trek down the hill, Sasha just fell over. They helped him to his feet, but he fell again, and this time he let out a piercing scream. Ludmilla told the rest of the group to keep moving while she returned to help, but in the meantime, inexplicably, Sasha was foaming at the mouth while blood started pouring from his eyes and ears.
What the hell?
Around a second time, he started violently convulsing, and then by the time Ludmilla could reach him, he'd already stopped moving. Upon seeing Sasha collapse, she cried out for the others to get help as she began trying to revive him, but basically as soon as they started moving again, Ludmilla also screamed out for help. Valia quickly covered the others and then told them to wait where they were and then ran back to Ludmilla and Sasha. In some accounts, Valia claims Ludmilla died the same way as Sasha, but in others, she claims that she'd had a heart attack. Either way, to Valia and the others' shock, Ludmilla passed out and collapsed on top of Sasha. Tatiana, Victoria, and Timur then climbed out from underneath their cover and rushed back to them, but almost immediately, Tatiana started grasping for air too, grabbing at her throat as if she was trying to force her airway open. Then, to everyone's horror, she ran to a nearby boulder and began hitting her head against it over and over until she finally went limp and slumped to the ground. Terrified and having just witnessed the horrific scene, Valia froze and dropped to the ground as well. Dennis, also horrified at what he was witnessing, crouched down and hid behind an outcropping of rocks while trying to get inside his sleeping bags, hoping it could protect him from whatever was happening to the others. Finally, Valia snapped out of it and composed herself, and crawled over to Ludmila and found that she wasn't breathing. Then she went back to Timur, who was by then completely hysterical, and lifted him onto his feet and told him to head for the trees. Next, she took Victoria by the arm and began pushing her out in front of her towards the forest, but Victoria went into a frenzy and started violently pulling away from Valia. Eventually, she even bit Valia's hand, which caused her to let go and then ran off toward the forest after Timur.
What?
But unfortunately, they also didn't manage to get far before they both began to cough up blood and started clawing at their throats, just like Tatiana.
What the hell?
They then watched as they started tearing off their clothes as if they were rolling up inside before they both collapsed to the ground. Dennis, who up until then hadn't been overcome by whatever was happening to the others, shouted to Valia to dump all the essentials from her backpack. He then took off for the woods as she began emptying her bag, but almost as soon as he broke cover from the boulder, he began to choke like the others, bleeding from his face and his body seizing as he fell to the ground. Valia then looked around and saw that every single one of her friends was on the ground and not moving, and her normal calm turned into a massive adrenaline surge, so she got up and sprinted, and she kept running until she was deep inside the woods. Finally, she couldn't run anymore, and she was far enough inside the forest and away from the wind. In the calm that follows panic, Valia tried to compose herself again, but supposedly by then, the storm had become so strong that trees were falling like matches around her. She eventually spotted a crack in a cliffside and just wedged herself inside it to hide until the storm died down. While waiting, she thought about her family, and she worried about what might happen to her mother if she didn't return home. At the same time, she thought about everything she'd just seen and tried to make sense of it. It was like a literal nightmare that she couldn't wake up from. A little while later, after the storm had calmed down a bit, and she had calmed down
Oh
a bit,
my god, he has a flying donut.
She realized that thanks to Dennis, she still had her pack and some essentials, which thankfully included a tent, a plastic ground sheet, and some clothing. Finally, after setting everything up, she climbed inside her sleeping bag, threw her tent over her for extra warmth, and then completely wiped out and fell into a deep sleep. The following day, she woke up with a 10-minute change.
Oh my, no way.
Her alive for long. She had no choice but to go back the way she came to see if she could find supplies in the bodies of the rest of the group, which also meant potentially encountering whatever it was that had caused everything from the day before. When she reached them, she cautiously approached and found that they were still where they had fallen. Then, after finding a map and some food from their packs, she had an even worse realization. She had no idea where she was. She had a map now, but the snow cover still made it impossible to spot landmarks. Instead, the best she could do was follow the tree line until she found something that she recognized on the map, so off she went down towards the forest again. Several hours later, after walking across the mountain essentially all day, she spotted an abandoned electricity relay tower in the distance. With this new sign of civilization, she set off once again and eventually reached it by nightfall. It seemed like as good a spot as any to set up camp, and as she did, she wondered if anyone had alerted search and rescue after they missed their rendezvous. It seemed inevitable that soon enough, search and rescue would be scouring the area looking for them. Unfortunately, no help was coming. When Ludmila's group didn't show up at the meeting point, Natalia and the other team weren't worried. She knew they were strong hikers, that her mother was a master, and there would be nothing to worry about. She assumed the rain had just slowed them down, and she'd see them all when they got home.
Have you lost Medicaid or chip? At
No.
healthcare.gov, 4 out of 5 customers
I
can
have
find
not
a
lost
quality plan for
Medicaid or chip.
$10
I don't
less
even know
per
what
month
the hell
with financial
Medicaid
help.
is.
Enroll in a plan today at healthcare.gov. Paid for by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services.
Oh god.
In the morning and in the light of day, Valia noticed that the tower she'd slept under was just one of a chain heading down the mountain. She guessed that if she followed them down the hill, they'd lead to somewhere she could find help. The route was difficult and the forest overgrowth slowed her progress, but she eventually reached the end and found a small abandoned village that was once supplied by the electricity cables she followed. It was disappointing that no one was there, but then just beyond the houses was a major river. Since the tourism festival was taking place in the area, and part of that was kayaking, canoeing, and fishing, she thought she could use the river to find a route or at least signal for help. By then, it was late again, so Valia spent another night at the waterside before heading down to the bank to see if anyone would pass by. The following day was a much warmer day, and the heat began to take its toll on her already exhausted body. After walking for another several kilometers, she remembered that in training she'd been shown how to use a sleeping bag to let rescue parties know where you are. so she draped hers in a great bush by the river, and then rested and waited, hoping to be spotted. Not far from where she was, a kayaker named Alexander was taking a small group of fellow Ukrainians down the Snezhnia River. It had been a relaxing day, and the thin curtain of snow that lined the banks made the area even more picturesque than usual. The tourism festival made it quite a busy river, with people paddling and fishing down the shore. On his way up, they passed a couple of fishermen from Moscow and waved hello. They waved back, as was the custom, as the group dipped their paddles into the clear waters and continued on their way. As they floated along, they spotted a sleeping bag by the riverside as they reached a bend. Stood next to it was the motionless, expressionless Valia. Assuming she was just another person out fishing, didn't get a response. Valia didn't even move a muscle. Right away, something wasn't quite right about the girl, making them uneasy as they continued down the river. And although they didn't want to, soon enough they knew they had to turn back. It's here that the story begins to break up a bit. Some reports say that Valia was covered in blood and became inconsolable when kayakers approached, but according to the kayakers, there was no blood. One of the kayakers also claims that she looked like she recently washed her hair and face in the river. When they got to her and asked what happened, she didn't say a word because she was too shocked and traumatized to speak. Instead, she buried her head into Alexander's chest and sobbed. The kayakers then wrapped her in a blanket to warm her up and dug out some antibiotics and other medicine to give her in case she had an infection. After she was bundled up, they all headed back down the road together. And before long, they bumped into the same fishermen they had met earlier, and Valia instantly recognized them. They were the fishermen from Moscow she met on the train. Upon seeing her, they smiled and waved and asked how the others were getting along. This is probably when Valia broke down and talked, although it's not entirely clear. In a garbled frenzy, she told them what had happened. She told them about the screams and the blood. She told them about the cold and the panic. She told them how the two youngest had run away only to fall to the ground, and how Tatiana smashed her head against the rock. And obviously, after hearing this, her new friend looked horrified and confused. None of what she said made sense. They decided to look after her from then on and helped her back out of the wilderness to let police know something had happened to the rest of her party. They even arranged for her train ticket back home once it was all over. It took a few days before Valia could tell the story in a way that anyone could understand. But once it was clear that something had happened to the others, the police commissioned a helicopter to go and search for them. The weather and other factors made it impossible for them to get off the ground until August 21st, nearly 2 weeks after the incident. And as it happened, they weren't the only people missing in the region. 2 other hikers had been reported missing on August 17th. After 5 days of searching, they spotted the pair who, like Valia, had found a good spot to wait for rescue and covered a bush with their sleeping mats so they could be spotted. Then, right after the helicopter took off with the pair on board, they spotted the missing party, and it wasn't a pretty sight. The bodies of the group were found on a small ledge and some were huddled together while others were some distance away. During those few weeks, the bodies had begun to swell up, while insects, animals, and normal decomposition had started to destroy what was left. Many of the battle-hardened recovery team threw up at the sight of them. To make the scene even more horrific, everyone in the group seemed to have removed most of their clothing, with most of them wearing only thin tights. 3 of them were barefoot, apart from the 2 youngsters.
This is straight up Dyatlov Pass stuff.
In her story. The bodies were eventually wrapped in plastic and flown to a nearby city for autopsy, and weirdly, the autopsy found that they had all died from hypothermia, except for Lyudmila, who had died of a heart attack. They also had bruising in their lungs, suggesting some issues with their breathing, and even more strangely, they were all on the brink of starving and were found to have critically low protein levels. So what caused these deaths is still a mystery. There are a few ideas, some more likely than others, but they all have problems. One idea is that they accidentally witnessed a military experiment and were murdered to keep them quiet, and then their deaths were covered up by the authorities, which is why Valia's story doesn't match what was found in the autopsy. After all, they had strayed from the usual route, and who knows what was going on in the early years of post-Soviet Russia. This doesn't explain how Valia survived, however. On top of that, as far as we know, no one tried to shut her up after she told her story. After the incident, Valia studied at college and left Kazakhstan for a new life. Now with a family, she's only once spoken about the incident and swears she never will again. She claims that she just doesn't want to relive the nightmare. At the same time, she's never retracted her original story. If she had been coerced into keeping quiet, why would she tell everyone a story that only makes things more mysterious? Why not just say they froze to death because they weren't ready for such a big storm and she was the lone survivor? And that's another problem with the secret government operation idea. It's a popular area where a lot of people go hiking, and it was even more popular at the time because of the tourism festival. It seems unlikely that a secret government project would use that spot when the mountains just a few hundred miles away are much more remote. So if it wasn't a government murder and cover-up, could the government have killed them accidentally? Russia has been known to use nerve agents in the past, and it even has a class of poisonous gases that fit the symptoms that Valia described. They were developed around 1993, and some reports claim they were tested in the Kamar-Davan region. This type of nerve agent was even famously used to assassinate a Russian double agent and his daughter in Salisbury, England in 2018. And if it was this nerve agent, some people think the rain might have had something to do with it. These poisons can dissolve in the water and hang around for long periods of time. And if they were testing the poison in the mountains in the weeks or months before the trip, the excess toxin could have been washed down in the heavy rain. At some point that morning, Sasha might have accidentally stepped into a pool of that poison. Then, after stepping in it, when Ludmila rushed over to help him, she was poisoned as well, followed by Tatiana, Victoria, Timur, and finally Dennis, who by crouching on the ground also became contaminated by poisoned groundwater. This theory could also explain why the police waited so long to begin their search. They might have needed to make sure the area was clear. However, again, it doesn't explain how Valley survived. She got to the first two victims before anyone else and touched the arm of someone who could have been contaminated. That should have been enough to kill her. On top of all of that, it would have just been the worst luck for those chemicals to have seeped into the ground just at the right time and in the right amount to contaminate a single hiker who then killed everyone else, all while never infecting anyone else any time that year. So another theory is that if they were poisoned, it didn't necessarily have to be a military nerve agent that made them sick. Maybe it was just their drinking water that was poisoned. High in the Kamar-Davan Mountains is Lake Baikal, as well as being a tourist attraction for its beautiful landscapes and popular trails. It's also where tens of thousands of tons of toxic waste have been dumped. A pulp and paper mill has been dumping chlorine and other nasty chemicals into lakes since 1966, and excrement and fuel have also been pumped in at least that long. One idea is that the group had been topping up their water in the rivers downstream of Lake Baikal that morning, and they were hit by something like chlorine poisoning. But then again, how did Valley survive when no one else did? And why did it only happen to this one group? You'd expect more reports of people becoming sick after topping up their water bottles in local streams, especially given how big the lake is and how close it is to some big towns and villages. But there are just no other reports, so if it wasn't nerve gas or something they drank, maybe they hadn't been poisoned at all. Maybe Valley was simply mistaken. Another theory is that the account that Valley told was simply her mind trying to cope with trauma. Human brains don't remember things perfectly. That's because the job of memory isn't to keep a perfect record of what we've done. Memory keeps hold of any information that our brains think might be useful in the future, bits and pieces that might one day help keep us alive. Some psychologists believe that's why people who nearly drown say they see their whole life flash before them. It's your brain's way of trying to find something from your life that can help you get out of the situation. At the same time, our brains also twist and distort our memories to help us make better sense of things, especially when things are traumatic. The group might have died of hypothermia as they camped out, exposed, wet, hungry, and without a fire to warm them. Valia might have survived because she was fitter than the others, had warmer clothes, was sleeping in a slightly warmer spot, or was just lucky. Then when she woke up, she would have found her friends dead or dying, some of them without their clothes due to paradoxical undressing, and then she could have panicked and run. When asked, all Valia will say was that the cold rain was the cause of what happened, and that Ludmila isn't to blame. But maybe she was, and Valia couldn't cope with that. As a survival mechanism, maybe her brain ignored her instructor's bad choices, and it gave her a false memory of what happened. It wasn't just a poorly planned hike gone wrong, but some terrible, mysterious sickness that passed from one to the other. The chief specialist of the area's rescue service thinks that this is the most likely explanation. He puts it down to mass psychosis caused by hypothermia and exhaustion. However, even he pointed out that others survived heavy snow at the same time the group, so why not them? He thinks that this might simply have been because they weren't prepared for the storm, but at the same time, they'd spent months getting ready with a known master mountaineer with a reputation for excellence, so could that be true? They were supposed to be prepared for anything, and it doesn't explain how Valley's training was good enough to keep her alive, but not the others. So, with Valley refusing to open up about what happened, and so many problems with each of the proposed theories, the Kamar-Davan disaster might always remain a mystery.
He's getting interested.
In any case, I'm curious to hear what all of you think happened, so let me know down in the comments which explanation you think is most likely. If you enjoyed this video, this is part of a series, so you might want to check out the other videos in the series. If you have a story suggestion, feel free to send it to the email found in the description. We also have a scary, interesting Discord, which I will also link in the description. Thank you all so much for watching, and hopefully I will see you in the next one. In this video, we're going to go over 3 stories about a cave explorer that went horrifyingly wrong. There's something that happens in the final story that demonstrates that no matter how prepared you are, sometimes things happen that are entirely out of your control. As a warning, if you're claustrophobic, you might want to skip this one. As always, viewer discretion is advised.
Done.
writing scripts were scary interesting, and inevitably, as I'm sure many of you understand, there are times when it's just impossible to focus. I've tried music to help me combat this, but I find song lyrics distracting, and having to constantly choose just the right song only wastes more time. Thankfully, the brilliant people at Endo have come up with a better solution. Using cutting-edge AI technology, Endo generates personalized soundscapes in real time based on things like your location, weather, the activity you're doing, and even your heart rate. So if you need to focus on a guide, you just choose focus in the app, and then Endo generates sounds to help boost your productivity. If you want to relax, Endo generates sounds.
Oh yeah, I saw an explosive
Endo
donut.
can even generate sounds that help soothe you sleep, which is perfect if you like to fall asleep to white noise. And these are all completely secret, so you won't have to waste time searching songs. They can also all be changed or adapted to whatever platform you're on. In fact, the soundscape you're hearing right now is one that Endel generated just for me. If you follow the half-mile trail above ground to get from one to the other, you might not realize it, but the two are actually connected underground by a 2-mile stretch of cracks and openings. This underground connection is popular among cavers because it's fairly easily accessible from the park's entrance. However, not anyone can just walk through it. These days, you have to get explicit permission to enter it, which is only granted if you've completed several safety certifications and you have all the necessary equipment. Park staff will even stop you and ban you if you don't follow these rules. And there are two reasons why there's something about safety. First, the water. The cave system is always water. You have to wade through and sometimes even swim through. That water also creates a lot of white noise, which can be disorienting. The second reason is that back in 1985, access to the caves wasn't as strongly controlled, and this led to some terrifying incidents. At around 10 a.m. on Monday, July 1st, 1985, Mike and Roman set off from the nearby parking lot to the mouth of Bronson Cave. The two of them had walked through the cave system a few times before, and it was a relatively straightforward route compared to some of the other caves they'd explored. The water had also only been minimal and knee-deep whenever they'd been there. That day, Mike was wearing shorts and a t-shirt, and Roman was only wearing a bathing suit. Other than that, they had witnessed a single flashlight each so they could see the dark. Even in 1985, there was sun turned up and tunnel going to the cave without a guide, but Mike and Roman didn't think they needed one because they'd been there before. At first, it didn't seem too different than the ones they were. They did notice a waterfall over the cave entrance. They'd never seen that before and joked about not believing it because it had been raining all night, and they figured the water would be a little deeper and they'd just have to swim a little bit, which wasn't a big deal to them. What they didn't know was that just half an hour after they entered the caves, a heavy downpour began. And this was so intense that a boat trip to the nearby twin caves had to be cancelled due to flash flooding. After about 90 minutes, Mike and Roman were about halfway in. That's when they encountered the first set of rapids. These were the waist deep and almost very powerful. Eventually, they even got to a section where there were no dry spots and they had to actually hop in the water if they wanted to continue. It also seemed like the water was getting more powerful by the second. They realized that getting in the water was a bad idea, so instead they found a ledge to sit on to wait for the water to recede. Then, to Mike's horror, Roman went to readjust and slipped right off the ledge and was immediately pulled under the water. Roman was then swept to the current where he stood desperately for anything to grab onto. Luckily, he had a light up rope and managed to grab a hold of it to keep himself from being pulled any further. Then he started calling out to Mike to let him know he was okay, because of how loud the water was, Mike could only hear that he was shouting but not what he was saying. Mike didn't know what the condition was and figured he probably needed help. So after about 30 minutes of listening
I'm fighting a donut, which is the funniest.
to try to get to them. This was a terrible idea. As soon as he slipped into the water, he was immediately sucked under the surface by the force of the current and slammed against the rocks along the cave walls. Roman then watched as Mike shot past him and then fell even somewhere deeper in the cave. Afterward, the cave just kept filling with water. All Roman could do was hang off for dear life and hope that the water would stop before there was no space for air. But it kept on coming up, inch by inch, and soon the water was getting closer to the cave. Thankfully, once it was high enough, Roman was able to climb up to a little ledge that had barely enough room for him to balance on. All you could do at that point was wait and hope the water would leave as quickly as it came. Also wonder if Mike could somehow survive being swept away from the water. He also had to hope that it receded fast enough when he found a quick bit because the cold water was rapidly chilling him to the point he was already shivering. Sometime earlier, Mike had been pushed through the cave and slammed into the water after water, and about midday he was ejected through the entrance to a tunnel.
Got him.
300 feet from where the water had picked him up. He managed to reach out and grab one of the wooden handrails near the entrance and use it to pull himself out of the water. Then he crawled 400 yards up the steep bank between the cave entrance and the parking lot. About an hour later, a park employee came across him exhausted and covered in blood. An ambulance eventually took Mike to a hospital and he spent 2 nights recovering. He had a badly damaged elbow and his body was covered in bruises and scrapes, but luckily he hadn't hit his head. He just had a gash in his forehead where he scraped it against the wall. Over the next day, the water receded but nowhere near enough for them to attempt to rescue him. At first, they didn't even know if he was still in the cave. He might have been flushed out of the cave just
Wow, got him
go
again.
much further. So while they waited, they posted men around.
I said I'm going at 500 kilos an hour. What the hell? What is it?
Lakes and water outlets to watch for his body. While they did that, 12 people from the American Spelunkers Association tried to get through the cave to see if they could find Roman, and it took them 3 hours just to get 100 feet into the system. The water was still 8 to 10 feet deep, meaning where there was an ear at all, it was only about 6 inches or so. Some suggest they go in with air tanks, but the experts at the time was a test sentence. The caves were far too small, and the pressure of the water was way too great. The next morning, the water dropped just enough for the rescue team to get further in. They made it from the entrance, flooded area roughly the same, into another chamber that was dry because it was at a slightly higher elevation. By that time, a fair amount of mud and sand had also built up, so the rescuers started trying to dig it out, hoping it would make it easier to progress. Then, at 8:52 a.m., one of the team heard something. It sounded like a human voice. They listened for a moment, and there it was again. The team then shouted back and realized it was Roman. He was still alive. While the rescue team had been waiting for the water to recede, Roman started making his own way toward the entrance and managed to get within 150 feet from the way out. But the same thing blocking the rescuers from getting in, stopping him from getting any further. So he found a small crevice in the rock and wedged himself into it. That's when he heard what he thought was scraping and voices and decided to yell out to them. There was still a wall of water between them, but the rescuers started to get advanced. By then, Roman was hungry and worn down by the cold, but what worried the rescue team was that he seemed exhausted. By then, he barely had the strength to talk to them, managing little more than a yes or no to the questions they asked him. The rescuers tried all they could for the next 10 hours to free Roman. First, they thought about drilling from above, but there was 75 feet of rock between him and the surface. And it would be not only drilling, but blasting through the diamond. That was obviously too dangerous.
No.
Then they thought about drilling him out from a dry chamber. But even if it were possible to get him out that way, they were worried it could cause a cave-in. So unfortunately, the safest thing to do was to wait until the water got low enough for the divers to go through and rescue him. Meanwhile, Roman was still clinging to the rock above and raging toward the water, and he was starting to wonder if he could even hold on. The rescuers managed to communicate to him that Mike had made it and was back at the cave entrance, trying to help in any way he could. Roman then thought that maybe Mike had been swept out, that all he needed to do was drop into the water below and get pushed through to where the rescuers were. However, if he'd done that, it probably would have killed him. It's hard to overstate just how lucky Mike had been. By then, the rescue team was making good progress. They managed to move some big rocks out of the way, freeing up space, making it easier for divers to get through. Finally, Roman saw movement and then a light coming out of the water. Before he knew it, a couple of divers were passing with a helmet, a wetsuit, and a flotation device. Roman then used what little strength he had and slipped on the equipment. From the time that he appeared in the mouth of the cave to when he was put in an ambulance, his friends and family and Mike gave him a round of applause. At that point, he'd been trapped for 54 hours.
Whew.
Roman had previously been a Marine, and it may well have been his Marine training that saved his life. But the man on that stretcher didn't look like a tough Marine. He was wrapped in a blanket, he was pale and covered in cuts and bruises, and shivering from hypothermia. At first, he could barely even open his eyes properly. he'd been trapped for so long in the dark that the bright light outside was too painful. Thankfully, both Mike and Roman would go on to make full recoveries.
When's the last time you woke up and felt good? Like really?
I mean, like...
Weybridge Cave is the largest in Vermont and the second biggest in all of New England. If you look at the cave, though, you'd never think so. It's so tiny and unimpressive that most people would probably just walk by and not give it a second thought. It's also not really easy to get to. There's no parking lot, signs, or special paths leading you there. The closest road is unnamed, and according to others who've been there, your best bet is to follow the trail of garbage and beer cans left by other people. Where the beer cans end is a 30-foot depression, and at the bottom of that, if you look carefully, you'll see a tiny opening about 3 feet wide. If you manage to find this entrance, though, going inside is not for the faint-hearted. First, you have to squeeze through the tiny entrance, and then from there, you have to climb down 2 vertical drops at a total of 55 feet. Apparently, once you're in, though, it's worth it. The cave system is filled with rooms of various sizes. The largest is 30 feet wide and just as high, while the smallest is so tight you can't turn around. In some spots, you can see leaves stuck to the ceilings from when the caves fill with water in winter. The water also leaves mud on the floor and on the walls, which is helpful for when you want to slide through a passage with a low ceiling, but dangerous when you're close to a drop. Because of all these features, despite being hard to find, the cave is so impressive that the whole area is named after it, which is the Weybridge Cave Natural Area State Park. On August 6, 2013, 2 men in their 20s turned up to explore Weybridge Cave. They had heard how extensive it was and that the main part of the cave was flat after a bit of a climb. For cavers, this sounded like a nice leisurely day underground. Rumor had it that the entrance was tricky because of the vertical drops, but they were strong climbers, so they thought they could tackle it without bringing ropes and harnesses. So at about 5:30, they squeezed sideways through the small entrance one at a time, and immediately they were surprised at how steep and wet it was. All they could see was the water pouring over the walls that formed the cave and into the darkness below. They had to be careful not to lose footing and fall down the first of the 2 vertical passageways, and this wasn't easy, not just because it was wet, but also because it became pitch black as soon as they got in and through the narrow crack that led to the surface. They had helmets and headlights which helped, but it was so tight they couldn't see much even with those. Once they were both through the entranceway, they began to free climb down the 20 feet in the area known as nuisance drop. After descending, they found themselves on a relatively long and steep passageway. Again, the water flowed down with them, and they had to take their time so they didn't slip and fall down the next steep drop. Soon enough, they saw the floor disappearing down again into the 40-foot main drop. In the dark, it was hard to see the bottom, and the two men realized why the first drop was thought of as the little nuisance. Eventually, they found some rope and went rock and they had to descend 40 feet to the cave floor. It was slow going and hard to keep hold of the rock face in the wet, but eventually they reached the main part of the cave. Once they were on flat ground again, the 2 men started exploring the system and sliding over the tunnels and large rooms. After an hour or so, they decided it was time to leave. Obviously, the only way out was the way they came in, which meant climbing back up the way they came down. The first man managed to get about 15 feet from the bottom when the damp rock slipped through his fingers and he fell backwards to the hard stone floor. He tried to break his fall by landing on his feet, but he felt his ankle snap underneath him as he did. A second later, he felt the full force of the drop on his tailbone. Right away, the other man ran over to check on him and saw that his friend's foot was facing the wrong direction. He'd also cut his head open, but worst of all, he couldn't feel anything from his tailbone down. Obviously, the man needed medical attention right away, but there was no way he was going to be able to climb out on his own anymore. Luckily, the other man managed to scale the walls more carefully, so he managed to get to the surface and call 911 at around 7 p.m. The first people to get there were the Weybridge Fire Department, but as soon as they got there, they knew it was something they weren't Trailmakers. They called in anybody from the area that they thought might be able to help. This included Steve Hazelton of the Vermont Cave Rescue Network. Steve immediately packed all of his gear and set off to the site, while his wife made calls to the best cavers in the area. One of the first to arrive at the scene tied a rope to an old dead tree and sent it down the drops to the floor below. Steve then used it to climb down to the man, along with a hardwired telephone so he could communicate with the service team. Soon after, more cavers turned up with the attachment of secure boat that would label so they could climb in and out of the cave more easily. Next, they went inside and released the meat cave ones that were already made with 4 much stronger ones. These, taken together, would be strong enough to take the weight of the man being released out of the cave. But there was still another issue. At the top of the main drop, the water nuisance drop into the cave there to as low as 14 inches. There was no way to get up to where their bodies were because they had to cut away some of the rock. One of the rescue teams then brought out an air chisel with them that ran off the same breathing apparatus scuba divers used. The top of the main drop was narrow in the S shape, so it took more time to cut away. They decided to focus the air chisel on that area, but nuisance drop was still a problem. To save time, one of the men then grabbed a sledgehammer, secured himself so he wouldn't fall, and smashed the rock at the bottom until it was wide enough to get the man through. Once the 2 pinch points had been widened out, they lowered a stretcher down. Steve then put the caver's broken ankle into a field brace and attached a stretcher to the line. Then the team began to raise the injured man up, but they had to take their time because he screamed in pain every time they moved. They also couldn't risk further damaging his spine. Before long, they got him to the first of 2 tight sections. Then they hooked him on the line and laid flat to give him a short break. Then they hooked him in again and asked the people up top to start pulling again. 10 inches at a time, he made his way to the entrance. Unfortunately, the entrance tunnel was the most difficult problem in the entire rescue. First, they tried twisting the stretcher to push him up on his injured side through the hole, but the people underneath couldn't push him through far enough before they couldn't reach him anymore. Before long, he was jammed in the entranceway. The pressure on the man's tailbone during this time was so great he screamed in agony again, forcing them to pull him back out to the flat part. There was just no getting around it. They had to make the hole bigger if they were going to get him out of there. Once again, they went at it with air chisels and then attempted to pull him through again. It was slow going, but the man remained patient, even when he couldn't help but scream in pain. Sometimes they had to stop altogether to modify the ropes and change direction, but eventually, at 6:30 a.m. on August 7th, they managed to haul him out. By then, he had been lying injured on his back for more than 12 hours. An ambulance worker assessed him, moved him onto a specialist stretcher designed for people with back injuries, and then placed him in the back of a pickup truck to drive him to a waiting ambulance. Unfortunately, eventually it was determined that the man had a spinal fracture. We don't know much more about him because he remained anonymous, but the local rescue service often use this story as a warning not to go into caves unless you know what you're doing, and certainly not without ropes and harnesses. It's not clear if the caver lost his ability to walk, so hopefully they left that detail out because he fully recovered. Unfortunately though, not every rescue is so lucky. Tank Cave is a vast underwater labyrinth of submerged tunnels and passageways between Mount Gambier, Millicent, and Victoria, Australia. To get to it, you need to travel to a small town called Tananoola, where you'll find a small field owned by the Cave Divers Association of Australia. In the past, the small opening in the ground was covered by a water tank, but now you'll find a metal trapdoor covered in dirt and rust. If you give the Cave Divers Association a call and provide your certifications, they'll unlock it for you and let you drop into the cave using a long ladder. At the bottom of this ladder is a beautiful underground waterhole, but that's just the beginning. If you swim into that pond, you'll find the entrance to a cave system with over 4 miles of passages discovered so far. These then branch out like a spider's web in all directions. It's obviously easy to get lost in this network of tunnels, so before you're allowed to dive there, you have to go through a course familiarizing yourself with all the main passageways. Most of these have fixed gold ropes to help new divers find their way back, but it's still a challenging dive, even if you stick to the mapped out routes. Then, once you're familiar with those main tunnels, you can head off through some of these smaller, sometimes never explored passageways. But crucially, you always have to be extremely careful. Even if you know what you're doing, it can still be deadly. Agnes Beloka was one of those cavers who knew exactly what she was doing. Apparently, she said she even dreamed about caves. That's how obsessed she was with the sport. Agnes was born in Poland, where her family moved to Australia when she was young. After school, she went to get 3 separate degrees, one in maritime archaeology, one in business marketing, and another in history of Australian studies. While she was in college, she was in love with water clubs in every school she attended. She was unit president of the Melbourne University Underwater Club from 2003 to 2005. One year, while on trip with this club to make it any volunteers to diving, she spotted a hole in the wanted to know where it led. This is what sparked her interest in cave diving. Later in 2007, she moved to Florida for an internship. While she was there, she met lots of time exploring shipwrecks off the coast. Then, after returning to Australia, she was appointed to explore the Melbourne cave system. During this time, she set a record for the longest dive by Australia. Because of this, and because of her dedication, she started to make a name for herself in the cave diving community. Soon, she went to work with some of the biggest organizations in space and was even hired to work as a stunt double and diving instructor in several movies. By 2011, she dived more than 500 times and had tons of experience. During that time as well, she had almost everything go wrong that can go wrong. She'd gotten stuck more than once and was only able to hold herself by staying calm. Her exact words were, "You can't dive," but to Agnes, the risk was worth it. The rush and the thrill of exploration were just too much non-stop. Thankfully, she was also assessed for her safety, following the diver saying that if you need it, take 2 every time she wanted to dive. Over the years, there was one place Agnes loved to dive more than anywhere else. It was a place back home in Victoria. It was Tank Cave. She first dived Tank Cave in 2010 and helped us out once to further map out the system. On one particular dive, she and her diving buddy found a passageway heading away from main tunnels, so they swam back to check Still, she continued on, moving slowly and carefully. About 1,000 feet into this new passageway, it eventually opened up to a much larger chamber. At about that time, Agnes decided she'd gone far enough and returned to meet her buddy at the small entranceway, excited to tell him what she'd found. This newly discovered chamber could have miles more passages to explore. On February 27th, 2011, Agnes went back into Tank Cave, with one of her main goals being to explore some of those unmapped tunnels. She and her buddy diver then dropped into the main pool and made their way up one of the main passageways, and like before, she noticed a tiny opening just 2,000 feet into the system. She wanted to see where it went, so she removed her gas tank, waved at her friend, and disappeared to tight space. This route was like some of the other ones she'd found before, and so the soft roof came off easily, filling the water with silt and making visibility close to zero. This time, though, after swimming for a while, she got lost in the silt and couldn't figure out how to get back. As she made her way to where she thought her friend was, she took a wrong turn and found herself in a small crack too small to even move. This meant she was now in zero visibility and completely stuck. But incredibly, Agnes didn't panic. She slowly moved, one limb at a time, shifting her head and body to try to free herself from the rock. But no matter what she did, she couldn't get any further and push herself back. As her air started to run out, she kept trying to free herself, slowly and calmly driving deeper into her training experience. Every time she stopped moving, all she could hear was her own breathing. Finally, miraculously, she managed to wiggle out just enough to free herself and to start backtracking to where she thought the exit was. Then she reached another tight spot, 1,800 feet from the cave entrance, but by then it was too late. She took in her last breath and then passed out. Her gas had run out just before she managed to find her way back. Her diver buddy waited, much to get her as time went on, and eventually he knew he had to get out because he was also on gas. And if he was, it meant so was she. He then contacted authorities and a search was officially started. It didn't take long before a good friend of hers spotted her body submerged at a depth of 65 feet. They then spent the next week trying to figure out the best way to get her body out of the cave. At first, they thought about drilling down to rescue her, but the divers managed to persuade the rescue teams that they could get her out by filming themselves diving to where